Hello, welcome to Inside Politics Talk Show. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. Today we're focusing on the upcoming presidential election in the United States. As the nation gears up for this crucial event, let's take a closer look at what's at stake. In just some days, millions of Americans will head to the polls to cast their votes. The outcomes of these elections can reshape international relations and alliances, impacting how the U.S. interacts with countries around the world. More details on the top of U.S. election 2024 latest developments right now. Joining me from the United States is Glenn Howard, former president of Jamestown Foundation and now is the president of the Saratoga Foundation. Warm welcome to Inside Politics.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you so much. So please tell us about the U.S. election 2024 latest developments briefly.
Right now, the race is very much tied. It's very even race, but then the 7 swing states, which are very important for the election, Trump is surging ahead. So the momentum now in the United States in the past week has been shifted to Trump. And so the elections, people in the United States are more worried about the economy and immigration. And in the battleground states, 7 of those states, Trump is now leading and ahead of Kamala Harris, and that's very pivotal and very important.
Well, some analysts argue that the fate of the 5th November vote will be decided upon in the battleground swing states, and the rest of the 47 states are largely irrelevant. Is there any merit in this prognosis?
Yes, I think that is an accurate statement. The battleground states of Arizona and places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania right now are a little bit divided between Trump and Harris. Right now, Trump seems to be ahead in Pennsylvania by several percentage points. I think the election will ultimately be decided by Pennsylvania. But the information recently with economic news is that many of the voters and the momentum of the election appears to be shifting to Trump. The more Americans learn about Kamala Harris, the more undecided and not approval, they're not giving her a high approval rating for her handling of her position as vice president. And because the economy is so important, that is an area that factors very largely and affects Trump's lead and the momentum that he is gaining in the election.
Glenn, how consequential is the forthcoming U.S. election for Washington's Ukraine policy? Will a possible Trump administration mark a sea change shift, or will it be the continuation of the current line pursued by the Democrats?
I think when it comes to Trump and Ukraine, he's been very vague and unclear about what he would do to try to end the war, and that's deliberately. He's trying to create an idea that he is not going to favor Ukraine or Russia. He says nice things about Putin. He talks about ending the war. But the thing that I think is very important is that Trump will probably want to have some sort of negotiations, and he'll try to get a suspension and fighting in the war. And the key thing is that Trump does not want to appear weak to Putin. He has always portrayed an image of strength, and he wants to be seen as in a very powerful position when dealing with negotiations. And the minute that Russia starts wavering and doesn't agree to the negotiations or does something that is negative towards the effort to bring a result or bring an end to the war, then Trump will immediately try to adjust his position. He doesn't want to appear to be weak. He wants to be strong. And that's to his advantage, and that's to the advantage of Ukraine. And that helps in our part of the world where it's very important to be seen as being very strong. And Trump tries to present an image of deterrence, and that's very important. The phrase that the Republicans are using now and the Trump people are using is peace through strength. That is a phrase that was used during the Reagan period by President Reagan during the Cold War. In other words, you need a very strong military, a very strong military backing to be able to go into negotiations with anybody. So whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or Iran.
Well, Trump has repeatedly claimed he can quickly put an end to the Russia-Ukraine war even within a day. Do Americans believe in that?
Well, that's if you listen to the Democrats, they will say that that's silly. Nobody can end the war in a day. But the problem is that they don't understand Trump's position. Trump's position, when he says end the war in a day, means what he just said. He says if they don't stop fighting, I will make the changes and do things that'll try to bring about a halt to the fighting. And that can mean a lot of different things. And that's the idea. Trump wants to create an issue of being vague and unclear, but strong. He wants to be able to portray this image of strength and uncertainty. And the uncertainty part about him and how he will respond is very, it's a very representative of Nixon. Nixon had the idea of using the madman theory, which is that if you don't agree with me, I'm unpredictable. And if I'm unpredictable, you don't know what I'll do. And so that's the position that Trump is trying to portray and trying to be very, very unclear, but it's deliberate. That's a part of his strategy.
Glenn, will it be right to assume in the case of Trump being elected, the U.S. will put an emphasis on China at the expense of Ukraine?
No, I don't think so. I think that many of the Republicans have championed the idea of China, that they're going to pivot to China. Ukraine and Europe does not matter, and they want to focus there. Now, you've had the Middle East come up, the war with Israel, the Hamas invasion of Israel on October 7th, and then you had the Israeli air raids and attacks on Iran. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you may talk about China being the focus, and it's true that Republicans and Trump people do talk about China, and they talk about a pivot to China. But there are other issues out there that are affecting the world, and one of those is Israel and Iran, and Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah. So the Trump administration may find itself very much back in the Middle East and preoccupied with the Middle East and not China. It's hard to say, but at the same time, the war in Ukraine continues and you can't ignore Ukraine. So my perspective is I think that they are not really going to give attention to Ukraine, but then they're going to end up having to deal a lot with Ukraine and a lot with Russia. And especially with North Korean troops now going to fight in Ukraine, it's demonstrating that you can't ignore the war in Ukraine. It's becoming bigger. It's the issue for Europe right now. So no matter what they do in trying to pivot to China and pivot to the Pacific, the issue of Ukraine and Ukraine war won't go away. So I would put Ukraine war, Israel in the Middle East, and China as the top three issues. They're not, I don't think any one of those issues is above the other. I think they're all equal right now. It depends on how the situation in the Middle East goes and whether Iran decides to retaliate against Israel. So we may be back in where the Middle East is number one issue and China and Ukraine aren't so important. And that's been the case for the past month. But again, the Ukraine war won't go away. The United States is being asked to do things militarily to help Ukraine. And if there's not a peaceful start to trying to end the war, my view is that I think President Trump will give Ukraine the weapons that it wants, which is they haven't had this hesitation like the Biden administration. The Biden administration and Kamala Harris are very risk averse. They don't want to get involved in a conflict with Russia. And I think that's a correct position. But at the same time, that's prevented them from giving Ukraine the weapons it needs to win the war. So I think these are all very important issues, and I think energy will be a very big issue with Trump, and I think they'll be much stronger on sanctions against Russia than the Biden administration. But I would leave this one point with you, that if Kamala Harris is elected, she won't be like Biden. She will be what they call Obama 2.0. In other words, many of her policies will resemble those of President Obama. And that's very worrisome from my perspective, because that means there may be less support for Ukraine than the Biden administration was giving. We will see. But the Kamala Harris I think will have a foreign policy that very much resembles that of the Obama administration and will not focus on world affairs as strongly as the Biden administration has.
That's true. The situation in the Middle East is escalating. And I shall bring my next question to this point. On Saturday, former President Donald Trump brought several Muslim leaders onto the stage during a campaign rally in Michigan. This move aimed to engage Arab American and Muslim votes who are frustrated with U.S. policies regarding Israel and Gaza. Can it help Donald Trump to influence voters' decisions?
Well, I think it's no one would question President Trump's support for Israel and the fact that he had some Muslim leaders on the stage in Michigan. I mean, come on. Michigan is a state with 200,000 Arab Americans. So if these people do not vote for Kamala Harris, even if they're neutral and they don't vote, that's going to hurt the Kamala Harris campaign big time. And that's going to create a lot of problems for them. And Michigan is a battleground state. So I would not view President Trump bringing Muslim leaders on the stage as an indication that he's going to not support Israel or be any changes to his Middle East policy. He's just being very pragmatic domestically, but in a very important state like Michigan. And many of these Muslim Americans who live in Michigan are very, very unhappy with Kamala Harris. In fact, they are now talking about voting for Trump, or they're talking about not even voting or voting for anyone but Kamala Harris, who they extremely dislike because of her policies and not assisting the Palestinians in Gaza.
Glenn, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you. Well, the choices made in this election will resonate beyond the borders and impact global affairs. We'll continue to take a closer look at the situation in the United States. You watched Inside Politics. See you in the next edition.